my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song, this cornerstone, this solid ground, firm through the fiercest drought and storm. What heights of love, what depths of peace, when fears are stilled, when striving cease. My comforter, my all in all, here in the love of Christ I stand. In Christ alone, who took on flesh, fullness of God in helpless babe, this gift of love and righteousness, scorned by the ones he came to save, till on that cross as Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied, for every sin on him was laid. Here in the death of Christ I live. There in the ground his body lay, light of the world by darkness slain, then bursting forth in glorious day, up from the grave he rose again. And as he stands in victory, since curse has lost its grip on me, for I am his and he is mine, bought with the precious blood of
So, as a result of coronavirus, there's a lockdown in the whole country, and this has affected so many people. Everybody's at home, and the ones that really affected are the people who are daily wage earners in our church. And majority of the disciples in our country are daily wage earners. We have 6,000, close to 7,000 disciples in our subcontinent. In India alone, we have 6,350 disciples. And most of them are affected because they can't go out to work. And the basic necessities to take care of their families, like food, medicine, rent, utilities, and now they are just afraid the school is going to start in June. Where will they get the fees to pay for their children? So even now, when we started this whole plan to help the disciples from our own local funds and contribution, we saw the number of disciples needed help was 400. Then it became 800, and now we took a survey this week. It was 2,500 disciples need help.
And the help that we provided them included, giving them a bag of provisions, and in some cases cash, sometimes both. And bag of provisions include about 15 kgs of rice, 5 kgs of wheat flour, 2 kilos of lentils, 2 liters of oil, 1 kilo sugar, salt, tea, spices. So this was the bag of provision that we handed out to the disciples. And all this cost about $30 per bag. And this bag of provision will last for about 15 to 20 days for about a 4-member family.
It's been a month now, so we finished a month, and it's continuing. The lockdown is continuing. I think one of the, of course, food is a big first need. Now the landlords have been asking the tenants, disciples or tenants, to say, when are you going to pay the rent? And if you don't, we have to survive, so we cannot keep you in the house. So they are facing that uncertainty as well. Where will they go if they are asked to leave and we don't have the money to pay rent? A typical family will cost around $100 for rent, and just to go by the basic provisions, it'll cost around $50 to $60 per month. Every Saturday we have a family group leaders or a Bible talk leaders meeting, Zoom meeting, and Caroline and me will lead a region consisting of 2 sectors and around 24 family group leaders. So I was just shocked just last week when I was just asking them about their situation individually. It just went by. I was just shocked to know that every one of them, almost every one of them, was struggling financially, and they are the ones who are responsible. They take care of disciples. They keep them encouraged. They call them. They have Zoom calls, Zoom prayer days every day, studying the Bible with the people, even though they're going through financial crisis. But I was just moved, and I was just really sad to see that our own leaders are struggling, and they need help.
Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to be together with you tonight. My name is Michael Farrell, and this is my lovely wife, Joanne. And we're going to be doing this lesson this evening, which is going to be based on Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 to 16. Tonight's lesson is for everyone, no matter what season of life you're in, whatever age you are, whether you're married, you're retired, you're a teenager, whether you're single, this lesson is for you. And the aim of tonight's lesson is to inspire us and to increase our understanding of God's calling in helping us to raise up our children, but as a church. And this evening's lesson is really a family talk. To help us maybe to kind of grasp this how important that's going to be, I want us to be able to use our imagination. So what I want you to do is to close your eyes. And when you close your eyes, no cheating, I want you to imagine what will our church look like in 20 years' time? What will our church look like in 20 years' time? Specifically thinking about our children. What will their spiritual lives be like? What will be the quality of their relationships, not just with one another, but also with their Father in heaven? So I'll just give you a few moments to think about that. Okay, so how did you find that? Was it easy to do? Was it challenging? And so to help us kind of, for now, look at this lesson tonight will help us to be able to influence what that picture will look like in 20 years' time. So I want to read in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11 to 16. So Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11 to 16. And that's the passage that we'll be using this evening. So it reads, so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining the whole measure of the fullness of God. Then we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people into deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow up to become, in every respect, the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body, joined together and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. So let's maybe drill down into this passage and try to understand it and apply it to our lives more clearly. You know, it starts off here in verse 11. It says, so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, pastors, and teachers. They have a role, and their identified role in this text is very specific. It's so that the body of Christ may be built up, so the family of God may be built up. And what does that look like is so that we can have unity in the faith and the knowledge, or reach unity in the faith and knowledge of the Son of God. And then that also flows on later on where we become mature, attaining to the full measure of the fullness of God. And then the outcome of all that will be, and the fruit of that will be, we will no longer be infants. And what's striking to me is he's writing to adults here, okay? So he's talking not just about infants in terms of age, but he's talking about spiritual maturity, and that we will no longer be infants. And then he describes that what often the life of an infant can be like, which is we're tossed back and forth by the waves, as it talks there in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14. And then, of course, he talks about when we're no longer infants, what's the opposite of that? Hey, we can become mature. And he actually mentions that 2 times in verses 13 and in verse 15 as well. So maybe to help us understand what it means to be tossed back and forth by the waves, we're going to look at a video and we're going to see a boat in the sea. And I want us to imagine if you were in that boat and that boat in the sea represents your life and the future life of your children, what that would be like. So let's do that.
At least everyone's in trouble, Brad.
So imagine a life lived out in that boat, in that sea, and being tossed and turned. And that's the life of an infant if we remain an infant in our faith and we don't become mature. And that's our calling as a church, is to be able to raise our children to be able to live lives that's not reflective of that boat in the sea that we've just watched in that video. Just moving on to the next slide. So really, what's that calling? What role do each of us play as a church in the lives of our children? And before we do that, I want us to really think about, each of us have a role. Every one of us have a role. But not everyone has a responsibility. So what I mean by that is, as a parent, if you've got a child, it's your responsibility to be able to raise your child up to love and honor and grow their faith and a relationship with God. But in terms of, for us as a church, no matter, again, whatever walk life we're actually in, we've got a responsibility, a role rather, to be able to, as it says in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 16, which you see on the screen, which is from him, the whole body, which is us joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. Now, that may sound very encouraging as thinking, yes, I can do that, but maybe some of us may feel like right now we're beginning to switch off, because what would stop us from playing our part in giving our heart to our children? Because after all, when it talks about here in verse 16, as we looked at it, it says, grows and builds itself in love as each part does its work. Some of the barriers, I think, for us to be able to fulfill this is just sometimes we look at this and think, maybe it's just the period in life I'm not very relatable to children, and so therefore we're not going to have much connection. So therefore I can't really make much difference in their lives. I can't really help them to grow in their faith. I can't help them to understand what a relationship with God actually looks like. And then what happens is because we feel like we can't make a difference, we completely underestimate how God can use each and every one of us. No matter what age you are, again, whatever walk in life, and all of us can have an amazing impact in the lives of the children. And sometimes, we just need to be bold and courageous and overcome those inhibitions. And I think not even just in our church, but even if you think about in Kingdom Kids, think about sometimes a lot of us don't be happy to help as an assistant teacher, but we're not willing to be a teacher. And sometimes it's because we feel like, well, I'm not going to be good enough. I don't know how to do that. But if we have a willingness and an attitude and a heart to want to learn how to be a teacher, then you know what? The Kingdom Kids are amazing, equipping new teachers to be able to do an amazing jobs in the lives of our young children. And so we've got to think about how we can help our children to grow and create great memories along the way. And we're now going to look at what does this actually look like. So we're going to look at 4 roles, as it talks about here, that each of us, we can wear one of these caps at least in the lives of our children. So let's look at the next slide. First slide is, we can be missionaries. Who? And it talks about here, we can be missionaries, share the gospel and our lives with our children and their families. The amazing thing is when we share our lives with our children and their families as well, and their parents, what I'm saying, and their brothers and sisters, really what we're doing is that as we share our lives, we're storytelling. We're sharing our testimony of how God is working in our lives, how we are growing in our faith. And that is really powerful because nobody can deny, no one can deny each of our testimonies. And then as we share our lives, then we can share that life has its struggles, but also its joys, that we all have our weaknesses, and that they need to be able to hear how we're overcoming and persevering. And that when we share those things, we're not talking about things that are going back when I was a young child, but actually talking about here in the present moment, here and now, what is happening now in our lives. Because the important thing about that is that in moving forward into the months and years ahead, they're going to be able to see the way you've persevered. They're going to be able to hear the amazing stories about how you've changed and grown. And that when you face challenges in your life, when you're seeking to grow in your faith, that life is about taking little steps towards our goals and towards our Father in heaven. I think the second thing is that we can enter into their lives and learn their culture and their language so that we may speak God's truth and shine light in the darkness. And what does it mean to enter their lives? I think it's really important to think about what is important in their lives. And sometimes we think we know that, and I know I've definitely fallen into that trap, but quite often I don't really fully understand what is truly important in their hearts for their lives. What is going on in their lives? And I learned that rather late in life, where I have 3 children, they're all in their 20s, and I remember having some strong sort of discussions because I felt like there was misunderstandings and I didn't really appreciate what they were actually going through. And it took over a number of months to really understand that I wasn't really getting into what they were experiencing and what they were feeling and what they were going through. And I'm thinking, if I was doing that for my adult children, how much more so for younger children as well? I think another thing is to seek to bring the spiritual into their everyday life. And why is that? Because the spiritual points towards God. And thinking about that takes creativity. That takes making the most of our opportunities. That talks about in Deuteronomy 6, where it talks about on the road, in bed, wherever you are, where you're sitting down. It's talking about a lifestyle of bringing the spiritual in everyday life. And we need to do that in a creative way, because other than that, it becomes kind of overbearing. And one of the things I appreciate about it is that just the preteens and the parents of preteens, but also other people as well, where they're actually using object lessons. They're using things like balloons and matches and pitchforks and broomsticks and glasses and all sorts of different vegetables, all sorts of different things as objects in life to be able to teach them about the spiritual. I also appreciate the amazing job that Ross and Rosie Stevens and also the Combs are doing in Kingdom Kids as well. But again, that's specifically Kingdom Kids, but we can also do that as friends and mentors to our children. And I think the final thing is love and reach out to our children and their families. And in doing that, we fulfill the Great Commission of Go Make Disciples of Matthew chapter 20:18. And what does that look like in our lives? That our homes, are to be a place of hospitality, where we invite people to have meals, that we have games nights, that we host. Sometimes we often see during time people celebrating Halloween. Why don't go counterculture and host night parties? What about, recently, our children are all in their 20s and we celebrated one of our children's birthdays and we just had a craft party together, doing crafts together, having Xbox and Nintendo nights, having Easter egg hunts, and helping them to build memories with our children. And really what that's all about is having fun with a purpose, and we're sowing seeds in our hearts. And I particularly remember and grateful to a young man who took our son under his wing. And the amazing thing is they had lots of fun together. But when they had fun together, and our son experienced that, this followed by being able to that young man to be able to speak the truth into my son's life. And the fun and connections that he had allowed our son to be receptive to what he was saying. And even now, I know my son is no longer in the faith, but I believe that those seeds were sown then will help him to return back to the faith. Now what we're going to do is going to move on to the next point with my wife, Joanne. Thank you for listening.
So another role that we can activate is to be a pastoral shepherd. So we can be a shepherd who knows that when left alone, sheep are defenseless. They're defenseless against the attacks of the enemy. Our children face all kinds of troubles at school or at home, and we need to be looking out for them. They need to know that we have their backs and that they never need to be alone in any situation. We can be shepherds who spend time amongst the sheep while leading and serving and protecting them. We should know who's in our flock, and the sheep should recognize our voice. I ask myself the question, how well do you know the children in our church? How well do they know you? It's a really big sector, and we're grateful for everybody that's part of our fellowship. But it is big, and you might think, well, how can I make a difference? But if we all start somewhere, then collectively we really will have an impact and make a difference for our children. And I think for families, talk about spending time. And if you're having your other family friends over that have got their children, what's it like? Do the children go off into a room and play together, which is fine, and which is good for them to do that. But maybe when we've got families over, when we have other children in our homes, let's spend time to really get to know them. Spend some focused time on them and do things together rather than just letting the kids play together. We can be a shepherd who, if any of the sheep wander away, we're willing to chase after them and to bring them back and to heal their wounds. Children are naturally, they can be rebellious, they can question and have their own ideas, and they will make many mistakes as they're growing up, as we do. But don't give up on them. Don't give up at the first or the second or the 100th hurdle. Go after them. Make an effort to reach out and to like the shepherd brings them back in. Go after them because they will get hurt, and they will need us to heal their wounds and to be there for them. We can be shepherds who, if they have one of there are difficult times, we can be shepherds who offer a shoulder to cry on and pray prayers and intercessions to God for our children and their families. That makes such a difference to know that people are praying for our kids, and our prayers are really powerful, and God does answer them in His time. Like we said, there are many children in our church family. Where do you start? Well, maybe you can start in your family group. If you're singles or teens, pick a family group that you know, or maybe your parents are part of, or pick a group of children that you're going to commit to praying for and to have that shepherding heart to take care of them.
Thank you, sweetheart. So the next role that we could play, which is we can be discipling teachers. And what does that actually look like? We can be discipling teachers who can teach, encourage, challenge, and stretch our young people in their faith. Well, how do we actually do that? What are some practicals that? We can express a vision for them of who they can be. We can, one of my favorite things is be able to look at heroes and heroines in the Bible and be able to point those heroes and heroines in the Bible out to our children and say, you can be like those same people. You can be a man and woman of great faith. You can be a man and woman where God's miracles occur in your life. And then, but not only just talk about who those heroes and heroines are, but think about what qualities or potential qualities do they already show in their character that is like those heroes, and try to kind of help them to dig down and to give them an aspiration that they can be like those heroes in the Bible. Think about Hebrews chapter 11 and the Hall of Faith and all those men and women that we can maybe ascribe an aspiration for them of who they can be like. Sometimes you can also look at, a lot of times when we spend time with children, they look up to us. And they sometimes maybe not put us on a pedestal, but they think so highly of us and have so much respect. And you can actually look at them and say, you know what, maybe I'm really great in this area in terms of maybe music and singing or whatever, maybe our Bible knowledge, but you can express, hey, you can be better than me and then you can say whatever that area actually is. And again, it gives them a vision of, wow, imagine if the disciples around Jesus, and he said to them, you will do greater things than I have. And if that's Jesus saying that, how much more so can we say the same thing? We've got to have a purposeful aim in our relationships then, that we can teach them to be, and then you can fill in the blanks. And we can teach them to do, and then get up to fill in the blanks. Again, but all those things are about building character in our hearts and our lives. And then our role then really is in teaching, encouraging, challenging, is speaking God's truth into their lives. I think the next thing it talks about there is that model what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And all that really means is just be a good example. You don't need to be perfect. And if you're teens here, I particularly want to appeal to you because, and also inspire you and call you higher, because in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, it says, do not let anyone look down on you because you are young, but being an example for other believers in your speech, behavior, love, faithfulness, and purity. The thing is, it's important if you're a teen to understand that a lot of the younger children, and particularly preteens, look up to you, and you are what they aspire to become. And that's super important for us to be able to look around and take those other children under our wings. There was a particular brother in the church who really used Bible particularly well. Our children saw that his conviction, saw his love for God, saw his passion. And it's those memories of seeing how he lived that out made them want to aspire to be like that young brother. And I have to say, by the way, when I say brother, what's really interesting in my conversation with my daughter last night, she says, when she looked at people who most inspired and changed her life, it was actually the brothers in the church, which is surprising because I thought it would be the sister, but she said it was the brothers. Another area where we can invite our children along on that journey of learning to live with the wisdom and passions of Jesus. And what does that look like? Example is whenever they go, whatever room, whatever building, whatever school, is that when they walk through that door, they're going to be the salt and light in that room. They're the ones who will influence what people think about what they talk about. They will be the thought leaders. They will affect change in the lives of the friends that actually hang around. And the other one is teach our children to love our Lord. In Matthew 22, verse 37, it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and all your soul, and all your strength. And that Jesus said that's the greatest command. That is the number one command. And to do that, we've got to be able to teach them to pray. We've got to be able to teach them to read the Bible. We've got to be able to teach them that our relationship with God is our greatest need and priority. And we've got to teach them reading the Bible is not about disseminating information, but it's about communicating with our Father in heaven. And finally, we've got to be willing to follow God no matter where the Spirit leads as they develop own faith. Now, this is really important because what does it mean for our children to own their faith? And what that picture looks like in our lives will have a huge influence in how we then approach our children. And when I say our children, that's as a family, okay? This is not your physical child, it's all the children in our church. I think about Jesus. He lived out this is teaching them to be independent. And Jesus lived out this principle of independence with his own disciples. He had 3 years to equip and mature his team. And I wonder if at times Jesus was not certain that they would ever mature into the men he knew they needed to be. After all, even at the Last Supper, they were still fighting for position. Jesus cursed in his denial of Jesus. And one of the disciples, even had a meal, ended up plotting to kill him and betrayed him. Still, Jesus knew he had to be prepared Jesus knew that he had to prepare them to carry on in his absence. And as a church, as a family, our goal, despite the challenging, sometimes wobbly moments that our children have, is to launch our children into their own faith and as they leave their homes. And then as we think about this and helping our children own their faith, do we intentionally equip our children and our teens with independence and not dependence? Do we encourage them to take ownership in the discipling of their own hearts? I remember Doug Jacob, he was a teacher in the church. When I'd often go to question him and ask him things about the Bible, he would first investigate what did I do my own investigation first? And if I didn't, he just wouldn't answer my questions. He'd tell me to go and seek the answers and then come back to him. I was still struggling. Teaching them that Proverbs 16 says, many advisors make victory sure, that we need spiritual people in our lives. And also important that we let them, and this is super important, let them experience the consequences of their own sin. That we should avoid shielding them from those consequences, because in doing so, we will equip them for independence. And that is super important, because one of the things that I've noticed when people go into the campus ministry, quite often you find a lot of children, or when I say children, young men and young women, in their first year of that time on campus really struggle. And we've got to think, if we work backwards, if we were to change the way that we teach them to be independent of their faith, what that would actually look like. I'm now going to pass you on to my wife for the next point.
So I'm going to talk about maybe the role of being a spiritual friend. You know, can you be a spiritual friend who invests in relationships with our young people, who is willing to walk beside them and provide mentoring maybe? You know, perhaps you can be a big brother or a big sister or an aunt, an uncle. You know, and if you're going to invest or take on maybe some of these roles, please also just make sure you get advice before you commit to something. You know, if we're going to invest in our children, we don't want to let them down, and maybe talk to their parents, talk to people that know you, to make sure that that's a wise decision to maybe start to be a big brother or sister or aunt to our children. You know, as a spiritual friend, we can offer love and affection to these young people who need healthy relationships with mature Christian adults. And some studies that show what helps children to be faithful into adult life, one of those things is about the number of healthy adult relationships they have with mature Christians. You know, being a good spiritual friend, you know, how can we do that? What makes a good spiritual friend? So I've got four things to think about. What makes a good spiritual friend? Be curious and not critical. You know, find out what it's like to be them. What's it like to be a child of the age that they're at in this day and age? Walk in their shoes. An important thing, and we've noticed this with most kids, their friends are really important to them. You know, be curious about their friends, find out about their friends, because they have a big influence on them. And talk about them, ask about them, and remember what they say. Follow up with them about their friends and how they're doing. But be curious and not critical about the things that are important to them. You know, another way we can be a good spiritual friend is ask and don't assume. You know, it's easy to say, but ask and don't assume what they're thinking or why they're thinking it or what they're doing. You know, engage with them in conversation and do your very best to be an active listener. You know, try to listen more than you speak. Another thing to being a good spiritual friend is really the idea of being careful and not crushing. What do we mean by that? You know, I've heard it said before, you know, if we are in a conversation and there's something that's being discussed that maybe we have certain ideas about, if we think we want to be right, if we're going to be right, then it means they have to be wrong. You know, but this approach can maybe crush their spirit. You don't want to do that. You want to develop them and want them to have, you know, good convictions of their own, and that they come to their own convictions. So that will give them the passion, the faith to live it out. So, rather than crushing, we want to ask careful questions. Maybe present scriptures to explore different ideas. Don't get into an argument with them, but encourage them with careful instruction, as it says in 2 Timothy 4:2. Let's be careful with how we present things. And lastly, connect before you correct. Be friendly, be interested in them, be present in the fellowship. Maybe you can have the mindset that every time I'm in fellowship, I will just make sure I talk to one child or reach out or engage in somewhere. Be present in fellowship. Another thing our kids said is that when we're engaging with children, and Michael does do this very well. He did that my husband right now. It's like, don't take yourself too seriously. Just get down to their level. Be fun. As we said before, when we're fun and when we're engaged and we're doing activities, that's when we can get into their hearts. That's when they know that we care about them, and they will listen far more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. So in conclusion, we're ending this. So we're talking about different roles we can play. So the question we've got to ask ourselves, who is God calling you to be in the lives of our children? Will you be a missionary? Will you be a discipling teacher? Will you be a pastoral shepherd? Or will you be a spiritual friend? And why I'm differentiating out in all of those is that because all of us have different qualities, different strengths in our characters, and all of us in some way can wear one of those hats. And my encouragement is to choose one of those hats and be able to wear that and be that in the life of our children. You think about in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 16 again, where just a reminder, it talks about from him the whole body joined and held together by every supporting ligament grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. Think about what role is, what gifts do we bring to the table, and how can we use those gifts to build faith in our children. And then finally, I just want us to think about talk to your Kingdom Kids coordinators. I know this is a talk which is purely about how we as a church, how we as a fellowship can be in the lives of children. But it's really important, talk to them. Think about how you offer your services, that you can still be present in the life of children. You make such a great impact in our children. And so many of them, as they're forming their faith, they look back in so many of those Kingdom Kids classes, you make such a crazy difference. But I also want to remind you as well that if you look at the amount of time that children are actually in Kingdom Kids classes, that represents less than 1% of their week. So what they are and who they are is represented in the other 99% of their week. And I want to think about, please really, really think about who you can be as a missionary, as a discipling teacher, as a pastoral shepherd, and a spiritual friend. Which one will you choose to be in the lives of your children? I know for myself, when you go break up now into the groups, maybe that'd be something for you to talk about. And my encouragement here is, this is not just about, if you're a parent, is yes, this might help you think about your parenting, but I want you to encourage you to think about how you can also then bring other children into your life as a family and help to raise and form faith in children from other families as well, whether it be in your neighborhood, whether it be part of the church, it doesn't matter where it is. And if you're in all sorts of different ministries, if you maybe you're looking at, I'm in my 70s, what difference can I make? I spent maybe 2 to 3 months every year with my grandfather while I was growing up till maybe I was about 13, 14. And my grandfather made such an incredible difference in my life and really helped me, taught me so much about who God is. And again, whatever walk of life you're in, and I think in particular, a lot of our young adults who are actually in here, no matter whether you're married, no children, or single, whatever it is, doesn't matter, whatever walk in your life, and you as teenagers in particular, I really want to encourage you to look at those children and, as Joanne, be present in their lives, give them some incredible, beautiful focus, attention, and love, build them up in love, and their faith will grow, and they will then look back and they will be able to point to. And I suppose for me, the biggest thing why this comes alive to me is Joanne and I have been involved in father and son camps, we've been involved in pre-teen camps, and we've been involved in teen camps. And all those things, and then when you look later on as they become adults, it's amazing the little stories that most people forget about, but for them were super important in helping them fall in love with Christ, learn to have a committed relationship with our Father in heaven, and be devoted to Him forever. So again, this slide will be passed out to your family group leaders. just to remind you of what the 4 different points are, and then you can answer those questions that are at once tonight. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your hearts, and thank you for being just a wonderful part of God's family. So love you guys loads, and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.